Welcome to English Plus Podcast, the English we speak, and much more. Learn English, expand your knowledge, and enjoy through our vocabulary builder, novel, grammar, literature, psychology, essential guides, and poetry episodes. Support English Plus Podcast by becoming a patron of the show on Patreon. Use the link in the description to support our podcast and to help our free e-learning journey continue. Welcome to a new episode of Vocabulary Builder. Today we're going to learn 6 new words from a story about Navajo code talkers. And those 6 words are intensive, earmark, scant, implement, valiant, and bulk. So without further ado, let's get to the story and then we will talk about the words.
In war, survival may depend on an army's ability to pass data in secret. Armies make intensive efforts to break each other's communication codes. Each wants to uncover what its enemy plans to do. During World War II, no intelligence group was more valuable to American troops in the South Pacific than the Navajo Code Talkers. The Navajo Code Talkers were a remarkable group of Navajo soldiers who used their native language to create an unbreakable code. The Navajo language has many earmarks of a successful code. It is unwritten, complicated, and known only by a scant number of non-Navajos. The Japanese could never crack it. During the terrible Battle of Iwo Jima, 6 Navajo code talkers sent and received 800 vital messages without a single error. Philip Johnston got the idea of using the Navajo language for a code in 1941. He had grown up among the Navajo and spoke their language fluently. He believed that any code based on Navajo would be secure. After months of testing and training, the first group of 29 Navajo code talkers implemented their distinctive system. They matched Navajo words to common military terms. For example, the Navajo word for hummingbird stood for fighter plane, iron fish meant submarine, turtle meant tank. They also created a secondary code in which Navajo words stood for English letters. Code talkers could then spell specific words by stringing words together. Some people found it odd that Native Americans made such valiant efforts to help a nation that had a history of harming them. Yet Navajo code talkers never balked at the chance to serve the United States. Their code remains one of the few in all of military history that was never broken. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August the 14th as Navajo Code Talkers Day to honor the contributions of these brave soldiers.
So our story was about the Navajo code talkers who used their unique language to create an unbreakable code that was of great use, especially in the Second World War. But for our purposes, we're going to focus on 6 words. And let's start right away with the very first word, intensive. Now, in the story we have armies make intensive efforts to break each other's communication codes. When we talk about efforts, we know that there is a lot of work. When we talk about intensive efforts, that's a little bit more than just doing something. So, intensive activity involves concentrating a lot of effort or people on one particular task in order to try to achieve a great deal in a short time. So that is the intensive, a concentrated effort, a thorough effort, an exhaustive effort. And intensive is spelled intensive, intensive. So remember, when we talk about intensive, we're talking about concentrated. We use that a lot with training programs. For example, we say each counselor undergoes an intensive training program before beginning work. So that was our first word. What about our second word, earmark? Now, in the story, we said the Navajo language has many earmarks of a successful code. So what are the earmarks, or what is an earmark? First of all, earmark is spelled E-A-R-M-A-R-K, And when we talk about earmark, we can use it as a verb and as a noun. Now, as a noun here, when we said the Navajo language has many earmarks, we're talking about any distinguishing marks or characteristics. But I have to mention the other use where we use earmark as a verb, and that is when we earmark resources. If resources such as money are earmarked for a particular purpose, they are reserved for that purpose. Let's say, for example, the extra money in the budget is being earmarked for new projects. So we can't use that for any other thing. This is reserved for new projects. And this is actually a common use for earmark and a useful one. So that was our second word, earmark. How about our third word, scant? Now, in the story, we continued and we talked about the Navajo language. We said it has many earmarks of a successful code. It is unwritten, complicated, and known only by a scant number of non-Navajos. So it is not like when we say French, German, even Chinese and Japanese, they may be difficult, but they are known to many people. Even Chinese, Japanese, or Arabic, which might be difficult languages, they are known by many people, but not the language of the Navajo people. They are known only by a scant number of non-Navajos. So what is the meaning of scant, which is spelled S-C-A-N-T? So scant, we're not talking about many, obviously. Now, definitely the meaning here is not to say that it is known by a lot of people. By scant number, so we're talking about very few. Now, we use scant as an adjective to indicate that there is very little of something or not as much as something as there should be. We use scant to talk about number to emphasize how small the number is. And now let's move to the next word, implement. Now, in our story, we said, after months of testing and training, the first group of 29 Navajo code talkers implemented their distinctive system. So when we implement a system, what does that mean? Now, obviously, we're using it here as a verb, and implement is spelled I-M-P-L-E-M-E-N-T. So if you implement something such as a plan, you ensure that what has been planned is done. So here, the code talkers made sure that the plan is done. So that is to implement a plan. It's not enough to plan the plan or to think of a plan. If you think of a plan or you come up with a plan, that's great. It's better than no plan. But more importantly, you have to realize this plan. You have to make sure it is done. So that is to implement something. And now for our next word, valiant. And that is V-A-L-I-A-N-T, valiant. Now, in our story, we said some people found it odd that Native Americans made such valiant efforts to help a nation that had a history of harming them. Now, we're talking about efforts. We use the word valiant to describe efforts. Now, after the story, and we talked about how unique that is, how clever that is, and maybe how brave that is. So, which do you think is closer to the meaning of valiant? We're not talking about a bad effort here. We're talking about a very positive adjective we can use for efforts, like we said here, or for many other words. Well, a valiant action is very brave and determined, though it may lead to failure or defeat. So it might be something that when we talk about heroism, when we talk about bold actions, that might not always be successful, but they are brave, heroic all the time. So valiant is just like saying brave, heroic, courageous, or bold. And by the way, valiant is spelled V-A-L-I-A-N-T. So now let's move to our last word for this episode, and that is balk. Or sometimes it is pronounced just balk without the L. But let's stick to balk. It's easier for pronunciation. In our story, we said, yet Navajo code talkers never balked at the chance to serve the United States. Now, after we said that they made such valiant efforts to help the nation with the history of harming them, yet Navajo code talkers never balked at the chance to serve the United States. So we're talking about valiant, we're talking about bravery here. They never balked. So Do you think that they kind of cowered or they didn't want to do something? Well, if you balk at something, you definitely do not want to do it or let it happen. Actually, it is something that tells you that you don't want to do something and you kind of fight against it. You don't want to do it. You recoil, you resist, you hesitate, or you even dodge the whole thing. And that's why we said here they never balked at the chance to serve the United States. So we're just saying that they never did this. They never balked. And balk, by the way, is spelled B-A-L-K. That will bring us to the last word of our story about the brave Navajo code talkers and the very unique system, which might not be as sophisticated as, let's say, the Enigma coding system, but because the Navajo is a unique language, and as we said, it is known by just a scant number of people around the globe that from the non-Navajos, it made it very successful, and it made it one of the few codes that was never broken. So that was about today's episode. If you would like to learn more words, use the link I will provide in the description of this episode. You will find more words in addition to the 6 words we learned about in this episode on my website. And you will also find a link to the interactive activities on Quizlet. You will find a link to the PDF downloadable worksheet that you can use to practice the words and make the vocabulary you learn a permanent part of your active vocabulary bank. And I can't stress enough that practice is the only way. It's not enough to listen to me. It's not enough to think that you know the word. You have to practice the words and you have to use the words in your writing and speaking. This is Danny, your host. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.